The Midnight Game is a supernatural ritual rumored to summon a malevolent entity called the Midnight Man. It's said to be an ancient pagan ritual used to punish those who disobeyed the gods. The ritual involves participants lighting a candle and inviting the Midnight Man into their home. They must then evade him for several hours until 3:33 a.m., avoiding being caught by this unseen entity. While the Midnight Game is often dismissed as an urban legend, some real-life stories have emerged from those who claim to have attempted it. One of the most unsettling involves a group of friends who dared to play the game, with terrifying consequences. Here's a detailed account based on such an incident. The incident, a game turned nightmare. In a small suburban town, a group of friends, Sam, Jenny, Alex, and Mark, were looking for something to do on a late Friday night. They'd heard about the Midnight Game online, and after reading the rules, they thought it would be the perfect thrill. Sam, the most skeptical of the group, dismissed it as a simple horror challenge designed to spook people, but the others were curious. The rules. 1. Write your full name on a piece of paper. 2. Prick your finger with a needle and place a drop of blood on the paper. 3. At exactly 12 a.m., place the paper in front of a closed wooden door, light a candle, and knock on the door 22 times, with the final knock occurring at midnight. 4. After knocking, open the door, blow out the candle, and then immediately relight it. 5. The game has begun. You must now wander your home, avoiding the Midnight Man, until 3:33 a.m. If your candle goes out, you have 10 seconds to relight it. If you fail, you must surround yourself with a circle of salt to protect yourself. Convinced it was just a silly urban legend, the group gathered at Sam's house to perform the ritual. His parents were away for the weekend, leaving the house empty and perfect for what they believed would be a fun scare. The beginning, invitation to the Midnight Man. At 11:50 p.m., the group sat around the table, preparing their materials. Each friend wrote their full name on a slip of paper and carefully pricked their finger, adding a drop of blood. Sam, still skeptical, joked about it, but Jenny, the most superstitious of the group, seemed genuinely nervous. As the clock struck 11:59 p.m., they placed the papers in front of the main wooden door of the house. The tension in the air was palpable, but they continued on, lighting their candles and preparing for the next step. At 12 a.m., Sam knocked on the door 22 times, timing the final knock exactly with the stroke of midnight. He then opened the door, blew out his candle, and relit it. "Well, I guess the Midnight Man is in," he said, smirking. The group laughed nervously, but a strange, heavy feeling settled in the house. The game begins, a growing unease. With their candles in hand, the group split up, walking through different parts of the darkened house. The rules stated that they had to keep moving, and that standing still could attract the Midnight Man. They weren't supposed to stay in one room for too long. For the first 20 minutes, nothing happened. They wandered the dimly lit house, talking quietly to each other as they roamed from room to room. However, as the clock ticked closer to 12:30 a.m., things started to feel off. Cold spots, Mark was the first to notice. He walked into the living room, and suddenly the temperature dropped drastically. The room was icy cold, despite the warm summer night. His breath came out in visible puffs, and he quickly left, rejoining the others in the hallway. Unexplained sounds. Jenny heard faint footsteps behind her as she moved through the kitchen, but when she turned around, no one was there. She brushed it off, thinking it was one of the guys playing a prank. But when it happened again, this time accompanied by a soft knock on the wall, she started to feel uneasy. Flickering candles. Sam's candle flickered wildly as he entered his parents' bedroom. It almost went out, but he managed to shield it with his hand just in time. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, just out of sight. The first candle goes out, the Midnight Man approaches. At 12:45 a.m., Jenny's candle suddenly went out. The room plunged into darkness, and she froze. She remembered the rules. She had 10 seconds to relight her candle before the Midnight Man could get her. Panicking, she fumbled with her lighter, her hands shaking. In the darkness, she felt a heavy, oppressive presence closing in on her. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to flick the lighter, but it wouldn't ignite. The air around her grew colder, and she swore she heard breathing behind her. "Jenny!" Alex called from the next room. Hearing his voice snapped her out of her panic. Finally, the lighter sparked, and her candle flickered back to life. She exhaled in relief, but the feeling of dread lingered. They regrouped in the hallway, whispering about the strange occurrences. Jenny insisted that something was in the room with her when her candle went out. Mark laughed nervously, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. Escalation, unseen forces. As the game progressed, the eerie incidents intensified. By 1:30 a.m., all of them had experienced their candles flickering or going out at least once. Each time, the temperature dropped, and they felt as though something was right behind them, watching, waiting for them to make a mistake. Shadow figures. Alex swore he saw a dark, humanoid shape in the corner of the hallway. It didn't move, but when he blinked, it was gone. He didn't mention it to the others, not wanting to spook them further. Unexplained movement. At one point, a chair in the living room was knocked over with a loud crash, even though no one was near it. Everyone jumped, their nerves fraying as the minutes crawled by. By 2 a.m., the house felt oppressive, as though the very walls were closing in on them. The Midnight Man wasn't physically visible, but his presence was undeniable. They felt as though they were being hunted. Final hour, the Midnight Man reveals himself. As the clock neared 3:00 a.m., the terror reached its peak. Sam's candle went out while he was in the upstairs hallway. He had grown cocky throughout the night, believing the whole thing to be a psychological trick, but now the reality of the game hit him hard. The air around him turned icy cold, and for the first time that night, he heard something. It was a low, guttural whisper, as though someone was right next to his ear. "Run." Sam's hands shook as he desperately tried to relight his candle. The whisper came again, louder this time. "Run." His lighter wouldn't catch. His heart pounded in his chest, and the cold intensified. The presence was so close now, he could feel it breathing down his neck. The shadows around him seemed to grow darker, stretching toward him. His lighter finally sparked, and the candle relit just as he felt something brush against his arm, something cold and intangible. He bolted downstairs, his breath coming in gasps. The others were waiting in the living room, huddled together. They all had their own stories to tell about hearing whispers, seeing shadows, and feeling an unseen force pursuing them. End of the game, 3:33 a.m. The last 30 minutes were the longest of their lives. Every second felt like an eternity as they paced the house, waiting for the game to end. They didn't speak much, too terrified to break the tense silence. Finally, at 3:33 a.m., the game was over. The house seemed to exhale, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as quickly as it had come. The temperature returned to normal, and the strange noises ceased. They sat in silence, exhausted and shaken by what they had experienced. None of them spoke as they cleaned up the remnants of the game, blowing out the candles, collecting the papers, and closing the doors. They didn't need to. They all knew that whatever had happened that night was real, and none of them would ever play the midnight game again. Aftermath, lingering fear. Even after the game was over, the fear lingered. For weeks, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being watched. Jenny, in particular, began experiencing nightmares where she would wake up in the middle of the night to see a shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed. Mark reported hearing faint whispers when he was alone in his house. Sam, the skeptic, never fully admitted what he had experienced that night, but he avoided dark rooms and refused to talk about the midnight game again. Though they survived the game, the Midnight Man had left his mark on all of them. This detailed account of the Midnight Game illustrates how what began as a thrill-seeking dare turned into a terrifying, unexplained experience that haunted the participants long after the game ended.